So you run a company called Empire, which is a distribution company. Last year at this conference, we had a guy named David Macias who runs a distribution company in Nashville called 30 Tigers. And that company really specializes in Americana music. And Sturgill Simpson, who had recently the #1 record in the country, is an artist who started as an independent artist who put out 2 records through that independent distribution company before then signing with a major, going #1, et cetera. And I spent a long time trying to find out who is the guy that is to hip-hop what 30 Tigers is to Americana. And then I was chatting with some rappers here locally, and they said, man, if you know about this company Empire out in California, and you really got to check them out. And so I tracked you down and begged and pleaded.
Here I am.
And you flew to New Orleans, and this is part of a long whirlwind road trip for you. How many cities have you been in the last few days?
New York, Miami, and then here in the last couple days.
All right, well, thank you for making time out of your crazy travel schedule to be here in New Orleans.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I am intrigued with the idea of you having a distribution company that works with independent artists and helps them sell records. Mm-hmm. I mean, all we talk about is how records don't sell anymore. Nobody's buying music, nobody's spending money on music, but here you guys are, you're a distribution company. And doing quite well, from what I gather.
Yeah. Yeah, we still sell a lot of records.
What kind of car do you drive?
A Cadillac.
Like I said, life is good.
Got to put money back in the American economy.
Exactly. So just tell us about Empire, what it is and what you do.
I mean, I think we're the modern distributor / label in an industry where we haven't seen much progression in a very long time. We've kind of had a very concrete business model for maybe the last 50, 60, 70 years since we've come to know modern music as we know it.
So you distribute records? Mm-hmm. Through all platforms, digital, physical?
Yeah, digital, physical, all platforms. Okay. CDs, vinyl on the physical side, even tapes. In some instances, people will still want tapes. And then on the digital side, all platforms. I mean, we really started out as a digital distribution company and then worked our way back to physical.
So can you tell us a little bit about your personal background in terms of your career and what led you to this decision and why start a distribution company? And pardon me if I'm not saying it accurately, but I think of you as a distribution company as opposed to a label. And I know you have some label services, which we'll talk about, but I still think of you as primarily a distributor, and that intrigues me. Because most people, I think, when they say, oh, I'm going to get in the music business, I'm going to start a label. I'm going to start a label, and I'm going to sell records. And people think that they need to start a label, but you didn't do that. You started a distribution company, and I find that fascinating. Can you talk about that decision?
Yeah, so, I started off making records when I was about 14 years old. That quickly evolved into doing a host of other things, DJing. I learned to be an engineer. I went to school and acquired skills in engineering. I then went on and worked in the Silicon Valley for a while. So I was early, I was very much a product of my environment, being that I was born and raised in San Francisco, right? So my parents' house was a mile away from the original Napster. So, we grew up in the middle of everything that was exciting, and it was kind of, we took it for granted. It was second nature for us. We were downloading MP3s in like 1996, 97. On
dial-up modems.
Yeah, on dial-up modems. I mean, we were encoding MPEG videos and hosting them on websites like in 99, 2000. I remember the first video I ever encoded. I took a beta tape and we encoded, it was To Me, a Stranger in My House. And we embedded it in a website for streaming at 300K when most people were still on dial-up and couldn't even stream it. But it was fascinating to us, but we didn't realize that what we were doing was on the cusp of something that was going to become great. So keep in mind, I was a DJ, a producer, a writer, and I'm running a music studio, and then I'm also working in the Silicon Valley in the middle of all this stuff that's going on. And so it was kind of a culmination of a lot of skill sets kind of came together. And then I think the last step on my journey before I started the company was Chris mentioned Ingrooves. I worked at Ingrooves 2006. They were very early on. They didn't have an urban department. They didn't know anything about rap music. I knew everything about rap music. I was firmly entrenched in the culture in the Bay Area. And so I went there and I acquired a whole bunch of content for them. I was doing content acquisition. I stayed there till like 2009, and then I left, and then Empire was born. So that's kind of like the gist of it. The reason why I started as a distribution company is I felt like as an independent artist in the Bay Area was like one of the meccas for independent rap music. And a lot of people don't know Master P started out in the Bay Area. He didn't start out in New Orleans. So he had a record shop in Richmond, California, which was in the Bay Area. It was called No Limit Records. And he started putting out records, and then he got a record deal with Priority, and then that's when he came back over here. But the whole idea of putting out independent records was very big in the Bay Area, from Too Short to E40, so on and so forth. So we always had a very independent culture, but over the course of time, the fundamental thing that all artists wanted was good distribution, right? And as the region evolved and things got more successful, it became harder and harder for new artists to break in and get distribution. And it was costly too, because if you had a distribution deal, then you would have to hire street teams and pay for conventional marketing, which was magazines, billboards, radio spots, and so it wasn't. You could acquire it as an independent artist, but you had to have some type of funding, and a lot of people were funding it with street money. So I wasn't in the streets like that, so I decided.
When you say street money,
yeah.
meaning like it, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so
we're all adults here. We know.
Yeah, so I decided to take a different route, and I said, okay, how do I make myself a commodity to the community? And that's when I decided to be a producer and an engineer. So I figured that would be my backdoor route to meeting with a lot of artists and acquiring a lot of skills. So when I started Empire, the thing for me was, what's the fundamental thing in music? And at that time period, it was distribution. The fundamental thing that everybody needs is to get from point A to point Z, right? And so, and then everything in between. So your watch ticks, but why does it tick? There's gears and sprockets inside, right? So, okay, cool, your music appears on iTunes, it appears on Spotify, but how does it get there? And so for me, I saw a lot of other labels that were very successful, excuse me, but they were always at the mercy of their distribution company. And so I wanted to build an entity that wasn't tied to another entity. So no umbilical cords, cut the umbilical cord off. And that was why I started as a distribution company rather than start as a record label first, because I wanted to be able to tick on my own. I didn't want to be at the mercy of somebody else. And that was why we fundamentally started as a distribution company first.
And so what were your first moves when you opened the doors? Were you looking for talent, or did you?
No, the first move was to perfect the technology.
So what did you, technologically, that you needed?
So I was working with a group of developers, and we put together the technology to be able to deliver directly to Apple and Spotify and Google and Amazon and so on and so forth. And then once we perfected that technology, which involved audio codecs, XML scripts, so on and so forth, once we were able to put all that together, then the next step was to figure out an accounting platform. And then once the accounting platform was ready to go, figure out how are we going to market and promote and bring other higher level services to these records and so on and so forth. And then the company started to progress. Acquiring the talent for me was the easier part, because my relationships, I already had been in the music business for a long time from a creative side. So it was easy for me to call a lot of artists who already had a trusting relationship with me in the past and say, hey, I'm starting this new venture. Are you interested? So it was easy to acquire talent.
But that delivery mechanism to iTunes, to Spotify, and so on,
Sure.
that was something that was not readily available?
No, it was readily available, but we did it a little bit different.
Okay.
Most distribution companies wanted 4 to 6 weeks to distribute content, right? And most distribution companies were wired to deliver large bundles of content. And I took a different approach. I said, we live very much in the context of now, in the music industry now, right? With social media and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and things going viral on YouTube and Vine and so on and so forth, we very much live in the spirit of now, especially in the urban community. And so we wired our company to be able to deliver things quickly. So when other distribution companies were taking 6 weeks to put content on iTunes, we were putting it up the same day.
Wow. So nobody can get their stuff from, to iTunes in one day.
I'm sure fundamentally anybody can do it. It's just the way we built the culture of the company.
And then, so one of the things that when we were promoting your appearance here, we referred often to the fact that you had Kendrick Lamar's first record.
Yeah, his first 2 projects.
So how did that come about, and why was that significant?
I mean, it's more significant now than it was at that time period because what we were doing at that time period, Kendrick Lamar was just another project that we felt like was compelling that we wanted to put out. But I mean, his fan base was not nearly as where it's at now. I mean, I had an employee who ran a hip hop blog called Dub CNN, and it was a pretty substantial West Coast blog from early 2000s till about 2010. It's still around, but he grew up in Germany, and he grew up listening to West Coast music. He interned for me for a couple summers when I was working at Ingrooves, and then when he acquired his master's degree, he wanted to move to the States. So he moved over, and we already had a good relationship, and he knew Kendrick, and he knew the Top Dog Squad, and so we talked about doing a distribution deal with them. We met up with a couple of the people, met up with Free, who's Kendrick's manager, flew down to LA, we had a meeting, and we signed a distribution deal with Top Dog, and I think we put out their first 5 projects that ever hit retail.
And you started as strictly digital.
Correct.
Distribution, and why was that?
Well, physical required having a lot of other relationships that we weren't ready for yet. And it also required more staff, it required more lead time, and it was an incremental part of the business that we weren't interested in at the time. At the time, having our own infrastructure, the technology, we controlled the pipeline for when we wanted to put out a record. Whereas, again, with physical, you're at the mercy of, physical retail, you're at the mercy of sub-distribution. There's a lot of middlemen in physical manufacturing times, lead times. It's a lot different.
But when you talk about digital, so many people think that digital means free. Spotify has a free platform,
sure,
which a lot of people use. YouTube is essentially a free medium. iTunes is the biggest of the sales channels for downloads, but not everybody is convinced that people are really willing to pay for money. How did you think that you were going to get transactions and real monetary, traction? I
think the most important thing to note is that what's free to the consumer does not necessarily mean it's free to the distributor. And so, oftentimes when you're on these platforms, on the free tier of Spotify, on the free tier of YouTube, there's advertising that's being inserted. And that's much like the terrestrial radio model where, you listen to radio and then 10 minutes on the hour, there's advertising to, absorb the costs and pay the artists and pay to BMI and ASCAP. It's the same in many respects in the digital space. If you're listening to music on a free tier on Spotify, that advertiser's footing the cost for you to listen for free. And then they're paying a royalty to the distributor on behalf of the artist.
So that royalty, if I understand correctly, that you're referring to is the public performance royalty that would go to the composer.
No, public performance royalty would be in terrestrial radio, right, or there's a small component of a Spotify stream that gets paid out.
Okay, so what is it that you're getting?
We're getting the masters, the royalty on the master recording.
Okay, interesting. Is it true that most of the deals that you do are direct with independent artists? So,
I would say more often than not, yes.
And so what's the percentage?
It would be hard to gauge that. We live in a world where every musician has an imprint or a label, but it doesn't really mean they're a label.
Right.
So I would probably say anywhere from 60 to 70% we're working primarily direct with artists.
And so, how does it break down? I mean, like if you take an artist onto Empire and you start getting them distributed into various channels, what's the deal look like? What do they get? And what kind of exclusivity is there?
Well, our basic deal and the way we started the company was we started with a non-exclusive deal structure. And the reason I did that is I felt that if I was doing my job right as a company, that artists would it's natural human behavior to want to stick with the people who do right by you. And it's also human behavior dictates that the moment you try to clamp down on somebody, they want to run the other direction. So my thing was, if I did non-exclusive deals and we created a good reputation for ourselves, that those would be long-lasting relationships. But more importantly, it was, what was my fastest path to being in business with somebody? And the fastest path to getting into business with somebody was doing record deals or distribution deals that were very friendly to the artist.
So I would imagine that if I'm an aspiring musician, rapper, whatever, and I make music that I think is really good and I want the world to hear it, and I've got a website, but I don't really know how to get people to pay attention to my website. Oh man, what I really need is distribution. I need somebody to get my music out and promote it adequately and make sure that it's available on all the different platforms. And hey man, this guy had Kendrick's first record and look what happened to him. I want to get in on that. Can anybody get on Empire? Or
No.
is there more of a curation, A&R?
There's definitely a curation to it. And again, that's another thing that we felt when we started the company, that we wanted to differentiate ourselves from a lot of other distribution companies. A lot of other distribution companies are interested in moving large sums and large, huge catalogs of records, and we didn't want to do that. When I was working at InGrooves, we were moving thousands of products a week, and you can't market and promote thousands of products a week, and you can't curate thousands of products a week. So we decided that we were going to be a distributor who curated music. And that by doing so, we would create a very good synergy with the blogs. We would create a good synergy with retail because we weren't flooding retail with a bunch of noise. And it would allow us to better properly market and promote the products that were living in our platform or in our ecosystem.
So what kind of marketing services do you bring? Because traditionally, distributors don't really, it was
Right.
the label that did the advertising and the marketing, and the distributor
Sure.
was, their job was to make sure that it was carried in Tower Records, and that was it.
Right.
You guys approach it differently. What do you do?
Yeah, so early on, we would always tell people we're a hybrid of a distributor and a label, and that we were 80% distributor, 20% label, and that we would bring some of the services that traditionally a label would bring. In the beginning, we did primarily retail marketing and blog marketing. So by retail marketing, we would go out and we would pitch, to iTunes, to Apple, to Spotify, to Amazon, Google, so on and so forth, and try to get into, new artist release spotlight or the hot track section or,
And when we say retail, we're still talking just digital.
Correct.
Okay.
And
And
then-
because, you can't buy an end cap on iTunes.
No.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, it's all based on editorial, thankfully, because if you could buy a placement on iTunes, you best believe the majors would have bought everything up.
Right.
So it left a lot of room for us to maneuver. And the other thing early on that I would note that was really important was that because we didn't have funding and we started from scratch, and it was really me by my own. The one thing that you can acquire for free is relationships. So I spent a lot of time building relationships. I was at a lot of conferences. I flew all over the world to build a lot of the relationships that I have now. And a lot of those relationships last a really long time because a lot of the people who are definitely key figures and gatekeepers in the music industry, they happen to move around from company to company. And once you've formed a strong bond with them, as they tend to shift around, you can utilize those relationships, to get your music into places that you otherwise might not be able to get them to. So
So as the distributor, if you do a direct deal with an artist,
Mhm.
and artist says, "Here's my record. I want you to distribute it," and you say, "Yeah, I think it's a great record. I think we can do something with this. Yes, let's work together." Do you have a standard deal, a standard percentage
yeah,
that
we have
everybody gets?
yeah, we've had a standard deal that we've been using for a long time. It's an 80-20 non-exclusive deal, and that's kind of internally we call that like our farm system deal, because we view our distribution company as a way to discover new talent, much like an NFL team might draft a player or a baseball team drafts somebody and then puts them in a AAA team and then they watch that talent develop.
And that 80-20 with the artist getting 80% and you
Correct.
taking 20.
Correct.
And you talked
And
about...
then that comes with retail marketing services and some blog services. And
Well, actually, that was my
so
next
on.
question, because there are some distributors out there, the big ones that people know about, that do physical primarily and also now digital. They have all developed these sort of label-like services that they sell
Sure.
to the clients, to the artists, for a fee. They have this a la carte. So, okay, well, if you want publicity and promotion to editorial, that's going to cost you X. If you want, to have physical as well, or if you want, something special, they have they're trying to basically figure out ways to make more money from the artist to sell these services that they've developed. And it sounds like those are things that are bundled in and that they get
there's
as
a
part
lot
of
of
that
basic
package.
there's a lot of basic services that are bundled into what we do. And then as we expand the relationship, there's other things that we can bring to the table that might require a cost or might not require a cost depending on how we structure our deal. Once we get past an 80-20 basic framework, then there's no rhyme or reason, like everything can go all over the place depending on the relationship with the label and the artist and what they're looking for, what we're looking for. It can be a slew of different things that end up happening.
Can I be an artist that's signed to a label and also do a deal with you? I mean, can I do a physical deal with the label and a digital deal with you?
That's happened in the past, but now that's not really viable anymore because most physical distributors are going to want the digital rights. I mean, I can probably count on my hand the times that's happened.
So how long was it before you also got into the physical product?
I think 2012 we started doing physical,
Mm-hmm.
and we realized that there was still a lot of artists that still had a viable following that would buy a lot of CDs and vinyl, and it just made sense that we didn't want to lose out on deals by artists going to other distribution companies because we didn't offer physical.
Is there a rule of thumb as to how the percentages break down to physical versus digital for your sales? I mean, is it just
No.
clearly everything? Everybody is buying digital and very little physical, or is it?
You mean percentage-wise?
Yeah.
It depends on the scope of the artist. Younger artists tend to skew highly digital. Older artists, I would say, 30 plus. Artists who have a 30 plus fan base tend to still be around 50-50. If the artist is a viable enough artist to need a physical component. If you can't sell 1,000 digital albums, there's no reason to have a physical CD out there.
So now you've also added label functions to the company.
Correct.
So you started as a distributor, grew into something that combined both distribution and label. So can you talk about
Correct.
what the label services are and how that differs from
Yeah.
the type of deal that you might do with somebody as strictly a distributor?
Yeah, sure. So a couple minutes ago, I referred to our 80-20 deals as like our farm system deals. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll acquire talent and then nurture the talent and watch the talent grow, right? So what a lot of major labels do now is they have what they call research departments. And their research departments literally like comb YouTube, comb Twitter, they're combing through Vine, they're looking at a lot of analytics that they receive from Shazam and Twitter and so on and so forth. And what they're trying to do is basically acquire a set of knowledge to then say, I want to go out and I want to sign this artist. We took a different approach and we said, we don't have the funding to go put together a research staff. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start to acquire talent in my distribution company. And because the distribution company is owned by us, we can see how different artists are performing in the distribution company. So what we did was we spent the time and the money to develop our own analytics system internally that tracks how different artists are performing on our platform. And then depending on how that artist is performing, we might approach them and say, hey, you're doing pretty well on your own. are you interested in maybe tearing up to one of our other deals where we can bring in a radio staff, we can provide money for publicity, for touring, for higher level production, mixing, mastering, publicity. It could be a host or a number of different things depending on who the artist is and what they need.
But that presumably changes the nature of the relationship a
Correct.
great deal, because one assumes that one then assumes that you are also doing things like offering an advance to pay for the recording.
Absolutely.
And then also means that now you own the master and the artist doesn't.
In more often than not, we just license the masters.
Okay.
So after 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, they'll revert back to the artist. But
Even if you've paid the advance and paid for the recording?
as long as we recoup,
Okay.
yeah. But most of our deals recoup, which is unlike most other record companies.
And what about the royalty breakdown? Do you do something other than a traditional record deal where, an artist is
Yeah.
getting 15, 20%
Yeah.
of net? What's your
Most
deal?
most of our deals are 50-50 or better in favor of the artist.
Okay. Well, that's quite different.
So, and I would say most of the deals that we do that we call record deals internally are 50-50 deals. And the reason we do that is most of the artists we work with, we don't refer to as artists or labels, we refer to as partners. So we want a lot of our deals to feel and live and breathe as partnerships. And when you do a 50-50 deal, mentally, just in my mind, I don't know about other people, but in my mind, it always feels like it's a real partnership. We're both pulling our own weight.
So when we talk about, let me just ask it this way. How do you,
Hopefully my competitors are not watching this video.
they might be. How do you feel about streaming? We hear so much about...
I love streaming.
Okay, because we
Yeah.
hear so much about how evil Spotify is and
No.
how they're ripping everybody off. And they, last week, I don't know if you were in the room before, but we mentioned that last week we had a presentation from a music publisher from New York who came and showed us an actual Spotify statement, and showed that the per stream rate that the publisher was receiving on behalf of the songwriter was like 0.000 something.
Yeah, the publisher receives a fraction of what we receive.
Okay. So why do you love streaming? Why is Spotify good?
I love streaming because the one thing that plagued the urban music community more than anything else was bootlegging. And we created a culture internally where we believed that it was okay to give away our music for free in exchange for attention. And so we were able to basically fuel companies that were giving away our music for free and then selling advertising on their site. And in the traditional music industry, that's copyright infringement. Radio stations can't play records without paying a royalty. I can't put your music on a TV show without paying you a royalty. So why can websites give away my whole album for free and not pay a royalty? And so it's very hard to compel somebody, especially a 17 or 18-year-old kid, to go get a credit card, sign up for iTunes, and then pay $10 to download an album. But it's a lot different to raise a generation of children and say, look, if you pay $10 a month, which some phone carriers bundle in with your phone bill, if you pay, and we know that music is moving primarily into the mobile world more so than ever, it just makes sense. If you pay this $10 a month, you can listen to whatever you want. There's no upcharge. And so we're finally bringing in a generation of children that we can say, look, here's a free tier if you want to listen for free. Advertiser will foot the bill. If you want a better listening experience and you want to be able to have a little more flexibility in how you listen or how you consume the music, then pay this $10 a month. Or in some cases, I think Deezer might be like $5 on Cricket, and Metro PCS, I think, only charges $5 for Rhapsody, I think. I might be wrong, but you're now telling people, hey, if you discover something on SoundCloud or you discover something on YouTube, you don't have to go pay $10 to download it. You're already paying $10 a month. Just go ahead and add it to your playlist. And when you're tired of it, pull it out. The other thing is that you have a lot of different tiers to how people consume music, right? So you have, your rabid, like your super fan that they're gonna buy anything that you do. And then you have your next tier of fan that, they might buy a concert ticket, they might buy a download, but they'll definitely stream you if they're already paying $10 a month. And then you had your casual fan that only plays what they hear on the radio, and then maybe you have some people that just listen to music to get through the day, and so on and so forth. And I felt like downloads only appealed to people that were more engaged in the artist, right? So it would take a super fan to pay $10 to buy an album. But you might hear a song on the radio as a casual fan and add it to your Spotify playlist and be like, it's not my favorite record, but it's cool enough to put on my playlist. That person who said it's cool enough to be in my playlist probably wouldn't have spent $1.29 on iTunes. And so I feel like streaming has opened the door to a whole new type of consumer. It's slowed down a lot of the bootlegging activities. And I feel like we're changing the consumption habits of people slowly but surely. And we're only in the infancy stages of streaming. And I think I saw an article the other day that said this is going to be the first year that the music industry is cash flow positive again in a long time. And they attributed that to streaming. Also, whether it's Spotify or SoundCloud or YouTube, urban music skews very high. In fact, on many of those platforms, it's the #1 consumed form of music or genre of music.
So if the publisher is getting $0.0007 per stream, what is the per stream rate for a distributor?
It fluctuates, and it depends on the retailer. You know, like Tidal's paying a higher per stream rate than, say, Spotify, but that's because Tidal doesn't have a free tier. They only have paid tiers. But rule of thumb, on average, it's somewhere around half a penny a stream in the retail world. YouTube is only paying like 1/10 of a penny per stream. But that's why a lot of artists want to be on Vivo, because Vivo's paying a higher per stream rate. They're paying about 3 times what YouTube pays. But you notice that when you watch a Vivo video, you're seeing a 15-second advertisement rather than a 5-second advertisement. So advertisers are paying 3 times the rate for 3 times the advertising. The time, you know, is 15 seconds versus 5 seconds. So
what does a successful release look like for you? What are some of the benchmark numbers that you're looking for? I mean, is there a certain number of streams that you want to see a release?
No,
hit,
honestly, I don't. This is going to sound crazy, but I didn't build my company for profit. It's great that we make profit and I can pay my employees, but I really built it to embrace the urban music community. I mean, it's like rap music gave me purpose in life from the time I was 13 years old. So I put the company together to give people a platform to be successful. So for me, it's not about how much money a project generates. I'm looking to take artists and figure out how to provide them a livelihood doing something they love, just like I have a livelihood doing something that I love. So it was kind of like the sum of its parts is greater than the one entity, right?
But still, I mean, as a business, you have to be, and on a per project
Yeah.
basis, you got to be thinking, okay, we're going to do this record, and we're going to put it out there, and we're going to market it, and there's got to be something that you're looking for is going to be an indicator whether this is a successful project or not.
Sure. I mean, obviously, you want it to be a profitable endeavor. I mean, you're looking at metrics and you're saying, okay, if I invest this much into publicity and this much into manufacturing and this much into production, is this project going to be cash flow positive? Absolutely. But I'm more interested in building artists that can just be fruitful for a very long time.
Which is great, but I'm just trying to get a handle on... like,
It varies. It's all across the board, because I have artists that make $300 a month with me, and we have artists that make $100,000 a month, and we treat them all the same. Because at the end of the day, the artist that makes $300 a month, or let me rewind, the artist that makes $100,000 a month probably started out making $300 a month. And we took the time and the energy to build him, to get him to that point where he can generate that type of revenue. So for us, it's the longer, harder road traveled. We're not trying to hit home runs. Like, we're cool with base hits and bunts and stealing bases. And
You never hear stories about people making $100,000 a month on Spotify, though. All you hear about is how people have hundreds of millions of listens and they're only making $2,000, $3,000.
it depends. Depends what kind of record deal they have.
Okay.
So, you know, if you're making half a penny a stream and you get 1 million streams, that's $5,000, right? Distributors taking 20%. In that particular scenario, we would take 1,000, they would end up with 4. Again, the streaming fluctuates. There's months where it's lower and months where it's slightly higher, because it depends on how much money is in the pool based on advertising. And then the way streaming works is they look at the sum of the streams, and then they break down what your percentage of the streams are as a company, and then they do it's all a bunch of complex mathematics, and they break out your per stream rate.
Okay, I got it.
But yeah, there's plenty of artists who make a very good living in the streaming space. I mean, you're looking at records that have 30, 40 million streams independently. That's a pretty significant amount of money. And that's only, if they have a hit single. We're not talking about artists that we work with that maybe have catalogs that are 15 albums deep, that have been popular since the 90s, and now those catalogs are out of print and they're not available, and the only place you can find them is in, digital retail space.
When you and I had a phone conversation a couple of months ago, and I asked you if you could come here, I was asking you about what some of your mechanisms are for reaching some success with different artists. And one of the things that you told me about, which was kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm naive, but it came as a surprise to me, was how important strip clubs are in breaking records. Can you talk about that?
It's a very specific subculture of the urban music space, and it really depends on what type of records you're making. But there's certain records that live and breathe in that space. And so oftentimes, like, the mecca for strip clubs is Atlanta. So I spend a lot of time in Atlanta, and we'll go into the strip clubs and we'll read the DJ's playlists, and we'll work directly with the DJs and establish networks in the strip clubs.
You're just there for the music. That's the only reason you're
we might hit 5 strip clubs in an hour and a half. We're literally in and out. We'll
but
go
I mean,
in.
so people, so explain to me how you break a record in a strip club. I'm trying to understand.
I mean, it just, different parts of the country have different culture, right? On the West Coast, strip clubs are not important. In the South, strip clubs happen to be a part of just the way the culture of the music is. So somebody might go after work and go shoot pool in the strip club, have some chicken wings, watch a basketball game, hang out with their friends, and in the meantime, they're listening to records. And so a lot of records will start organically in the strip club and then migrate their way out into the mainstream clubs. The other thing is that many of the DJs that are spinning at strip clubs are also spinning your favorite mix show at radio. So there's a whole cycle to the whole entire thing, and then the girls that are dancing, your record might end up becoming their favorite record, and now they're requesting the record from the DJ. So it creates a whole entire cycle for the record to live and breathe and potentially break out of the club. I mean, it's gotten to the point where I think the Wall Street Journal did an article on it.
And so can you pay a promotions person who specializes in strip club DJs? And that
there's
person
certain
for a
promotions.
fee will
There's certain promoters that you can pay a fee that'll go in and work the DJs. And then there's different cities, like, Houston is an important city. I would say Dallas is pretty important. But Atlanta's kind of like the measuring
there will be
stick.
occasions where a DJ will take an unknown record by an unknown artist.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever heard this song before.
Sure.
And they'll put it on, and it comes over the speakers.
The first time I ever heard B.O.B. was in Stroker Strip Club in Atlanta. The Nothing On You record was the first time I ever heard it, was there. DJ Funky's a good friend of mine. He's the resident DJ there, and he said, "I'm gonna play you a new record." And I already knew who B.O.B. was because I was distributing his mixtapes at In-Grooves. And so before he had a record deal, and I remember going in the club and he just played it. I was like, wow, that's a hit record. And he was like, watch, just give me a couple weeks. Because they have a whole network of DJs that all work together, and then,
Right.
they all go work the records together.
So it seems like what you guys are offering is the kind of thing that any artist would really want to be a part of.
I think a big part of what we do is release strategy. Like, we really understand the urban music culture and how to move the records. And I'm not, I guess, a stereotypical CEO. I'm out in the field all the time. I'm in the studio with artists all the time. I'm at clubs. I'm visiting artists in their homes, and I'm always out and about, running around. I was in New York a couple of days ago because I was in a bunch of recording sessions, and I was with A&Rs from other labels, and we compared notes. Even though we work for different companies, there's still a lot of camaraderie in the music industry, and we all speak to one another. And at the end of the day, urban music took like a really big hit in the mid 2000s, and a lot of us want to stick together to see our community do well, you know?
Well, it seems like you've really put your finger on a certain approach towards helping artists that are not well known gain a lot of traction in the
Sure.
marketplace to the point where they're actually selling, units and making real money and building real careers that can lead to other opportunities. And I just got to imagine that if I'm an artist, I'm thinking, I want to get in on some of that. So if I'm an aspiring artist, how do I get your attention? What's the best way to get you to invite me to be part of your company?
I mean, that's really hard to say. There's so many different ways we acquire content. Sometimes it's referrals. Sometimes, we're looking at things. We're seeing things climb up the chart on iTunes, maybe independently. Somebody dropped a record through TuneCore and broke the top 200. It could be somebody just found my email and sent me something in my inbox that was compelling. I've signed artists with
I have
no
tried
story.
to find your email. That is not possible.
People have found it.
Okay.
Yeah. People have found my house number and called my mother's house where I grew up, my father's house, in like 11 at night looking for me. So, a lot of people would get upset by that. To me, it's, I never, growing up, if somebody would have told me at 14 years old, you'll grow up one day and have a company that people are going to chase you down to want to do a deal with you, I would have said, where do I sign up for that? I'd have been like, I want to do that. So early on, when I was young, the analogy that I always tell people is, at first, I wanted to be Snoop. And then after that, I realized that I would rather be Dr. Dre. And then at some point I said, you know what, I'd rather be Jimmy Iovine. And it was, I think it was just the way my brain was wired and my personality and the way I was raised. I always thought that my talent was better served for the success of many than myself. And that's why I called my company Empire. That was the whole concept behind it. It's a self-preserved ecosystem where we don't depend on anybody else, and all the resources are internal, and we've built like our own ecosystem where artists can live and breathe. So a lot of what we do is we share resources. We spend a lot of time educating artists. I've been thinking about doing my own event called Empire Day, where and start doing them in some of the hub cities where we have a lot of artists, and maybe making them free events to labels that are assigned to us to help educate the artists on, this is how you sign up for Sound Exchange. This is how you acquire your publishing. This is how you roll out a record. This is how to align your social media. All the things that help people become more successful, right? And if they become more successful, we become more successful. And we share a lot of relationships. So we might sign a new artist who we think is compelling, and then we might have another artist on the roster that has a story, and we might make them tour together, or we might have them collaborate on a record together. There's a lot of different things that we do internally. I know, is Chris still in here? No, he took off. But he said the relationship to Spotify. So if I have a record that's doing well on Spotify and none of the artist is in New York, then I might have them visit the Spotify office or the Vivo office. If they're in San Francisco, we might shoot them over to Pandora or the Twitter offices. So on and so forth. So a lot of what we do is networking, education, release strategy, how to release a record, when to release it. Rappers come to me all the time and want to drop their projects on 4th of July. Hey man, I don't drop my project on 4th of July because everybody's going to be barbecuing and my album's the shit. Everybody's going to listen to it. I'm like, that's the worst idea ever, because everybody is barbecuing and nobody's at the internet to download your damn record. So 4th of July is like one of the lowest consumption rates of the year. Everybody's hanging out with their family. The least thing they're worried about is downloading new music. They're playing Bob Marley and chilling. So we spend a lot of time telling people, hey, it's September. People are going back to school. This is a good time to release music. People are getting iPads. They're getting phones. College students are entering dorms. It's a compelling time. Homecoming is coming, so on and so forth. Christmas is the highest consumption time of the year digitally. From December 25th through the first week of January, it's like triple the download and streaming rate. Our numbers go through the roof. So a lot of times, if there's something compelling that I'm working on that I think is really cool and I want to get it to a broad audience, I'll hold that release back till Christmas. And then I'll go try to swing against the majors and try to get product placement during Christmas. because I know the majors are coming out with all their stuff, and there's two ways to play a game, right? There's you play to win or you play not to lose. And we always play to win because we always believe that the risk was worth the upside. So a lot of people will see somebody like Jay-Z dropping a project and saying, I don't want to drop a project on the same week as Jay-Z. And I have the complete reverse philosophy. I want to drop a project at the same time as Jay-Z because if I could steal a slot right next to Jay-Z, then there might be a chance that somebody clicks on my album because there's going to be so much more traffic to the stores. And if I'm in the new release section right next to him, then maybe I can leverage that to get some exposure for my artists.
And does that work?
Yeah, it's worked really well for us.
Well, clearly you know what you're doing. Well, if you do decide to do these style events in different cities and you come back to New Orleans, please consider using this as a venue because we would love to have you back here.
This is a nice place. Yeah.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Ghazi? Yes, please use the microphone.
Hello, how's it going? First, I want to just say thank you for your openness and candidness and your passion. I really appreciate the information. I was wondering, do you view your record label as being a specialty with urban culture and urban music, or do you have artists of different genres?
Well, we ventured out into different genres now, but I primarily started in urban music. I would say we lean 80% urban. So a big chunk is hip hop, R&B, soul, a little bit of gospel, some reggae, and a lot of Latin urban music too. And then now we're venturing out into other genres, just because we feel like what we've done in urban music, other genres probably need as well. So we're starting to replicate it in other genres. The first genre that I started with is Latin music. So we're doing like a lot of reggaeton and Spanish hip hop.
Okay. All right.
But yeah, I mean, we're even doing a lot of pop music now, EDM. We did a big country release like 6 months ago with a guy named Kane Brown that ended up going to a major, but it went with a single, went like number 3 on iTunes overall, number 1 on country. Rock, we've done a little bit of rock. And we've kind of done a little bit of everything now.
Awesome, awesome. And what's the, even now that you're venturing into other different genres, is there a specific trait that you look for in an artist, or does it everything cross your table? Or do you have a team that they're passionate about it as well too?
No, we have a team internally that looks at everything, but a lot of it does cross my table. Every Thursday we do our A&R meetings where we basically internally as a group present a lot of the new things that are coming across our table and we talk about them, and then offer deals or don't offer deals.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Hi, Ghazi. Jean Nathan with Crosstown Conversations. Thank you for coming on my show this past week, and Scott for making this happen. Technology keeps changing like almost on a daily basis, so streaming is hot now. What's next?
That's a good question. I don't know what we can do next. I think we're at the final.
What about virtual reality and that?
Yeah, I
kind of
have
thing?
no idea. The one thing that I think we haven't explored in streaming yet is the tiered business model, which the gaming world has mastered, right? So, unlocking other levels. When you have Comcast at home, you're paying for, extra for the NFL ticket, or you're paying extra for NBA League Pass, or HBO, or on-demand movies, or so on and so forth. So what I would hope is that as, we go from 4G to 5G and whatever is beyond, and broadband becomes more readily accessible, that maybe they'll add other features to streaming that can be unlocked at other price tiers. I would imagine that maybe someday, hey, you're a Beatles fan. Well, you can get all the Beatles liner notes and all these, this supplemental footage that you couldn't otherwise get, just pay an extra $1 a month, so on and so forth. So I think, in my mind, I would hope to see that streaming goes there. But again, streaming is in its infancy stage right now. I think we're only in the first 20% of where it's going to be at in the next 5 years. Wait till, millions of cars hit the road with Spotify and Pandora and Apple Music embedded in there. And you got Android and iOS being embedded into cars now. Different parts of the world are starting to get familiar with, streaming technology because phones are available there now. Africa is a huge market. South America is a huge market. Russia, Southeast Asia, these are all markets that are still very much bubbling up. So I think the most exciting part of streaming is that we're headed into a global economy. So I don't know what's after streaming. I think we still have a lot more to grow in the streaming space before we even go into virtual reality or whatever is coming next.
We have time for one more question. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm Pierre Lefray Jr. I had wanted to know, what do you think the odds is for somebody just stumbling across your music in the digital world?
It's pretty high if you can create a story for yourself. I mean, a lot of the artists that we discover are, either got records on SoundCloud or on YouTube or, have some type of story going on. Like one of our most successful records of last year was Cha-Cha. I don't know if you heard the record. It was called I Like to Cha-Cha. So I heard that record when it was on SoundCloud and it had 100,000 plays. By the time we did the deal, I think it was at like 400,000 plays. And then we started him off in an 80-20 deal. And then after we did the 80-20 deal, we signed him to a single deal. And then after the single deal, we changed it into an EP deal. And then we cut the videos and added music and then, added a radio budget. And then he wanted to go to a major and I have a partnership with Atlantic. So we took him to Atlantic and we changed the dynamics of that deal. And literally, so he's a good example of something that went completely from A to Z. It went literally from a record that he cut in his bedroom and put on SoundCloud. And then now he's on national tours on a major label.
Right. Sure thing, man. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Last bit of advice for an aspiring rapper who wants to have a story just like that. What's the
I think the most important thing that I always tell people is the biggest part of the battle is just being present. A lot of people have these great ideas and sometimes they're afraid of the possibility of their own success. So if you really want to make something happen, just be present. Be present on social media, be present on SoundCloud, on YouTube. There's a lot of things that are available now that weren't available 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that can create a compelling story very quickly if you utilize the tools and you make them all talk to each other. Go, depending on what type of music you make, go visit the strip clubs in your area or go visit the conventional clubs. Try to create a relationship to DJs at the radio stations. I'll have artists come to me all the time and say, well, radio don't play my fucking record. Have you ever gone to the club and met the DJs from the station? No. What are you talking about? You haven't even made an attempt to create a relationship to the radio station. Step one is be present, create the relationships, and second part of that equation, I would say, is put together some type of a business rollout plan and try to stick to it. A lot of what we've done that's made us successful as a company is a lot of it is fundamentals and just sticking to a framework.
Awesome. Well, this has been really, really great. Everybody, please, big thank you for Ghazi Shami from Empire. Thank you for being here at Sync Up.